Coming to you from beautiful British Columbia, it's Earth, We Can Do This with host Paul W. Slusher.
Well, welcome to Earth, We Can Do This. I'm your host, Paul W. Slusher. This is Earth, We Can Do This, coming to you straight from beautiful British Columbia, Canada. This is our second podcast back since we reemerged after a long hiatus. And if you're watching on YouTube, hello. If you're listening on your podcast somewhere, Apple or Spotify or somewhere else, hello to you as well. Before we get started, I'll briefly give you some contact information, and then we're going to get into the topic. Boy, you're going to want to tune into this one. If you're already in, you're already tuned in. But I want you to stay tuned in because this is a profoundly interesting topic. But first, let me give you the contact information. We have a new email address, earthwecandothis@gmail.com. That's earthwecandothis@gmail.com. I want to let you know that's our, you can write to us, tell us what you think, what you don't like, what you do like, whatever. Please don't swear at us and call us names. But I would love to hear from you, actually. I would love to hear what you thought about the topic. What do you think about the podcast? Ideas that you have for it, etc. So always welcome to hear from the viewing audience. And we have people from around the world, not just North America. So welcome to the world too, because people in Ireland and Australia and in other places, really, we're getting people all over the place listening to the podcast. So welcome to the show. Today is all about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, trauma. Okay. Now, if you have PTSD or you think you know something about it, I can guarantee you that you're going to learn something today. I can guarantee you that I'm going to give you at least one bit of knowledge you didn't know before you listen to this. I can guarantee you that if you don't know very much about it, you're going to come away going, wow, man, oh man, I think I really understand what's going on with PTSD now. I promise you that, really. I went to great lengths to make sure that we had some incredible experts throughout the whole podcast, some incredible clips from really brilliant people, great testimonials, great information, some statistics, etc., and so on. This is a learning experience, but it's also meant to be because Earth, We Can Do This is all about Earth, we can do this. Earth, we as a planet can do this. We can improve, we can get better, we can get healthier, we can get stronger if we focus and we do our best to know the facts, work towards truth, and work together. That can happen. In fact, it's already happening in communities all around the world. But we need to do a better job, especially now with the virus, especially now with the world as it is. We need to listen, be connected, be compassionate, and always seek evolution. Always seek that next level of awareness. So we're going to get right into PTSD. I'm going to give you the 5 big questions I'm going to ask in this broadcast. Number 1, what is PTSD? What is it? Even if you think you know, you might be surprised that your definition is somewhat limited compared to what the actual data says PTSD is. What are the symptoms? How do you know you have it? What are you looking for? That's number 2. Number 3, if I have PTSD on some level, what does that mean for my life? What does that mean for me? Like how does that affect me? Okay, so what, I have PTSD. So what? What then? Okay, that's an important question. I asked that question. I was diagnosed with PTSD a number of years ago, and it changed my life. But at first I was like, okay, so I have PTSD. All right, what the F? Number 4, if I suspect somebody has it or I have it, what are my options? What are their options? How can I assist treatment? What kind of treatment can I get? Do they work? What works? There's so many things out there. What do you do? Where do you start? And if you've already done some therapy or some specific treatments, if it's not working, what's your next step? We're going to try to get into some of that. And lastly, we're going to take 5 big takeaways from the whole thing. We're going to wrap that up at the end. But as we get there, we're going to talk about other people who've had it. Myself, there's a really good clip I got coming from a guy. Well, he's so cool. Love the guy. And I'm going to bring him up at the end. I won't talk about it until we get there because he's just so damn cool. You're going to love him. And also some famous people. I've got a list of 10 people would shock you who've actually had PTSD. You probably wouldn't know, maybe 1 or 2 you might know about. I'm sure you don't know of at least 6 or 7 of these, never even heard of that. Man, they had PTSD. Wow. And why they did? My God. Like there's one, oh my God. Okay. You just stay tuned for that. Because that is, I was like, what? When I read it myself. Okay. So that's what we're going to jump into. But first I want to mention the sponsor because the company that I built with my wife, contactsforless.ca, contactsforless.com, coming soon to the United States, is a company that sells contact lenses online, contactsforless.ca, but we donate over half of our net profits to saving the planet. We donate half of our money, half of our profits to the nonprofit that you choose, There's 80 plus organizations. One Child is a one that protects children from sexual trafficking. There's ones you might know of: Humane Society International, Humane Society Canada. There's Sea Shepherd Society, one of my favorites, are out there trying to stop the killing of whales and dolphins. There's so many organizations doing really, really, really good work, and we let you decide where we put our money. There are a lot of companies selling contact lenses online. No matter what they tell you, they're more concerned about profits than the planet. I just know that. We just studied them long enough. I'm in the industry, I know. Some of them pretend that they're all about the planet, but they're really just throwing pennies at the issue. The big multi-corporations that make millions of dollars are not giving away half of their money to save the planet. That much we also know. If they were doing that, boy, serious change would happen. But they don't care about that. They got investors and people who want to make money, et cetera, and so on. That's not us. My wife and I own the company. We are a humble company in Canada. So if you're in Canada buying contact lenses, go to contactsforless.ca, save some money, save the planet, do a good thing, and be part of a company that's local, organic, honest, and doing a good thing as well. Okay, awesome. So let's get to PTSD. Psychiatry.org has a definition. Let's go into that definition. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist act, war, combat, or rape, or who have been threatened with death, sexual violence, or serious injury. Now, all of that is true. I don't discount one word of that. However, is that really the full definition of PTSD? Absolutely not. It's a nice, big chunk of it, but it's not all of it. And there's so much more to PTSD than that. But, giving respect to that definition, that is accurate. It's not inaccurate, but it's limited. Now, I'm going to play a clip for you. We're going to start off with this. I think this is a really good place to start. Dr. Gabor Mate. Dr. Gabor Mate is a Canadian physician, writer, speaker. You may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Shattered Minds, among many other books. He's a brilliant guy who has researched ADHD, PTSD, and addiction, and the connection between all three of those. He's a phenomenal guy. And in the first clip, he talks about ologists, the overall condition of the body and what its origin is. And then we're going to, on the back end, he's going to give his definition, sorry, I hit my mic there, of what PTSD is. So take a listen.
By the way, just as an interesting exercise, let me just ask you right now, I'm not going to ask you any personal details, but how many of you in the last 5 years have been to a respirologist, a gastroenterologist, a cardiologist, a neurologist, a gastroenterologist, a dermatologist, maybe I said rheumatologist, any kind of an ologist? Just put your hand up. Okay, great. All right. Now, put your hand up again if they asked you about childhood trauma. One person. That's great. If they asked you about stresses in your relationship with your spouse, a couple of hands. About job stress. Yeah, so we have maybe like a 5 to 10%, and that's really good if they ask you about it. And I wonder how long they took the discussion, but it doesn't even occur to them. But I'm telling you, all of you who went to these specialists were there because of childhood trauma. Virtually all of you. Now, there are diseases that you can't put into that category. There are genetic diseases, like there's one that runs in my family, muscular dystrophy. If you have the gene, you'll have the disease. It's nothing to do with life or stress. It's just, although that can affect the course of it, but whether you get it or not is simply genetic. Those diseases are extraordinarily rare. Like 1 in 10,000 of the population will have a disease like that. Most diseases have little or nothing to do with genetic factors. So these are then the patterns that I noticed in my clients.
So there you go. I mean, I think, I don't really have to explain much of that. It's quite clear what he's saying, that most of these diseases to the body are going to start with the mind. They're going to start with thoughts and emotions and the combination of your experiences and how you react to them. And that leads us to the next quote, his definition of what trauma is, and indirectly what PTSD is. So let me get to that, because that I think is one of the most succinct and I think one of the most accurate definitions I've seen or I've heard.
Because it all depends on how you use the word trauma. And trauma, for me, and that's a whole other lecture, but trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. And things can happen inside you for which you don't need very dramatic events. But trauma essentially is a restriction of your capacity. It's a limitation. It's a constriction in the body. It's a constriction in your mental capacity to respond in the present moment from your authentic self. Essentially, trauma is a restriction of your authentic self in the present moment. That's what trauma is.
Wow. Okay. So trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. Wow. I mean, it goes back to the previous podcast we had about ADHD, in which we talked about how one may have latent tendencies towards ADD or ADHD, but it's the circumstances and environment that bring it out more often than not. Some people just have it, but PTSD is not one of those ones you just have at birth. You don't have trauma at birth. But you may have trauma as a result of your childhood abuse. And there's so much. We're going to go into that. There's some good stuff coming up on this. I wouldn't say good stuff, informative stuff about what trauma is and all the variations of it. Okay, so again, let's just reedify quickly. So PTSD is, in a lot of ways, you could argue, is a sensitivity issue. Some people have trauma and suffer, and some have trauma and don't. You know, I looked for, and I didn't successfully find, but I remember years ago when I was in law school and we were doing mental health law, there was a case that came up about a group of kids. I'll be really brief on this, but it's interesting. A group of kids were abducted by bus. I'm going from memory here, so I apologize if I get some of these facts wrong. But a group of kids were abducted in a bus and by a guy who was planned on killing them or probably molesting them and killing them. It's unclear because he never got that far. He got them on this school bus and he took them out to some remote area and he hid them in this bunker, and he was planning on killing them, and he was going to kill the girls first, I believe, if I remember correctly, for whatever reason this sicko was doing this. And but before he could do that, the authorities saw the bus and were able to get there, and I guess they neutralized him, for lack of a better term, and killed him, I think. And this all happened in front of the children. A lot of these children were interviewed at the end, and they took a lot of notes on the interviews with these children at the time. Many, many, many years later, a group of psychologists, or I think they might have been dissertation applicants, people trying to get their PhD at a university, decided they were going to study this, and they went back and tried to find all the survivors of this event. And what they found was, when they found notes from the event where the kid was a little bit more okay with what occurred, like kind of treated it like it just happened, it was just a thing that had occurred, they turned out quite well. But the ones that really saw it as traumatic did not. Some of them had committed suicide, there was drug addiction issues, etc. And this was one of the first of its kind to notice this. Of course, as it comes up later in the broadcast, we've known, though, about the effects of war for a very, very, very long time. This goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. This isn't just yesterday or even the Vietnam War or any of that. This goes way back, knowing what happens when somebody fights in war. So there is a sensitivity in some people and not in others, or a way that they relate, how they internalize an event differently. I'm a person who internalized trauma differently than another person. Hence, I had or have PTSD. You could argue that someone can be cured of PTSD. That's a big discussion, but overall, you stop having the symptoms, you are no longer really diagnosed as PTSD. And there's some cures. There's some stuff at the end that really claim to be cures, not just treatments, but cures of PTSD. So we're going to get into that in a second. But PTSD is based on a series of events over time. It can be neglect, abuse. It can even be poverty, or the experience of deep poverty, or refugeeism just in itself, regardless of an event where something dramatic occurs, and yet trauma exists. So it's really how the person internalizes the trauma. Again, it's not what happens to you; it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. I think that's really one of the big takeaways of this entire broadcast. Okay, so now we're going to get to Dr. Shaili Jain, and she has a really interesting description of PTSD and talks a little bit about what's happening in the brain. So let's cut to Dr. Jain.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition that's been documented since ancient times, but it remains elusive. It's famous for causing things like flashbacks, nightmares, and an exaggerated startle reaction. Lesser known, but equally devastating, is how it renders an emotional life barren. It mutes happiness and yields instead to this raging irritability that keeps the sufferer on the perpetual verge of alienation from the world and everybody who loves them. Now, this incapacity of PTSD, it's not brought on by poor lifestyle choices or moral weakness or character flaws. It's actually a really complex interplay between our environment, our brains, our bodies, and our genes. In the PTSD brain, there's a region known as the temporal lobe that's highlighted in this slide. And in the temporal lobe is the hippocampus, a part of the brain that is crucial to memory formation. That is smaller in people who have PTSD. Also in the temporal lobe is this region known as the amygdala, which is crucial to how we mount a response to fear or anger. That is amped up in people who have PTSD. It's hyperactive. In the frontal lobe of the brain, that is the part where us humans, we regulate our decision-making, our judgments, our execution, and our day-to-day life. That is underactive in the PTSD brain. In addition to these neurobiological changes, people with PTSD also have alterations in the stress hormone cortisol, serotonin, and noradrenaline. PTSD seeps beyond the confines of mind or brain. It infiltrates cells and bodily organs and bodily systems. It's emerged as a risk factor for a variety of conditions, from heart disease to cancer to obesity. And PTSD rarely lives alone. 80% of sufferers have at least one other psychiatric condition, be it depression, be it anxiety or addiction, and all have an elevated rate of death by suicide. So you can start to get a sense of the tremendous disease burden of PTSD.
So what I get from that quote, and that is a phenomenally detailed bit of information about the brain, but also about how the experience alters the development of the brain. So if a child goes through trauma, clearly the other aspects of the brain are going to develop differently. That's just research. If you're older and you have trauma, then I think it begs the question, does that mean that different areas of the brain are stunted even if you're grown? I mean, you're always growing. You're always learning and developing. So does that mean then an adult victim of trauma has a modification in that area of the brain? I don't have the answer to that, but I think you could certainly surmise from this that would be the case. Tremendous insight, because for those of us with PTSD or someone you love who has PTSD, they're not choosing this. It's not like, snap out of this, come on, get over your PTSD. It doesn't work that way. I mean, there are ways to get through it, but just snapping out of it ain't going to happen. That is simply not the case. So now I want to cut to a guy named Brad Burge. Brad Burge is the Director of Strategic Communications for the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Now, what am I talking about here? Why am I bringing this guy up? Well, he's one of the surprises of the broadcast. First, I just think that he has a really quite interesting thing to say about PTSD in general. And on the back end, we're going to get to him a little later about something he brings up, controversial, but possibly one of the most effective new treatments for PTSD. But let's jump right into what Brad has to say, and I'll catch it on the back end.
PTSD is a serious diagnosed psychiatric condition, and the symptoms can be anywhere from persistently annoying to chronically debilitating. We don't know why some people get PTSD from traumas and others don't, but what we do know is that PTSD does not go away without treatment. The symptoms of PTSD include always being on alert. The fight or flight response is always activated. Avoidance, trying to get away from the trauma, situations that remind us of the trauma, to try to keep it from happening again, no matter how unrealistic that might be. We're always re-experiencing the trauma, where it's always on repeat, like flashbacks. And that happens whether we're awake or asleep. Persistently terrifying thoughts and nightmares are very common with PTSD, and as a result, people with PTSD have 2 to 3 times the suicide risk of people without. And the problems just go on and on. People with PTSD are at higher likelihood of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, unemployment, and just overall generally lower quality of life. And altogether, these symptoms are what make living with PTSD so difficult. They involve getting away from the trauma to try to keep it from happening again. So about half of us will experience at least some traumatic event in our lifetime. 8%, about 8 million adults in the US right now, will develop PTSD. Women are twice as likely as men to develop PTSD from trauma, and among Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, as many as 20% have PTSD.
Okay, that's quite a few people, and 8%. When I started this research a couple days ago and I was looking into it, I had done a lot of research on PTSD for personal reasons. But what I came to realize, 8%, wow. And there's even some argument that that's underreported even. In the military, for example, I used to work, I won't go into my details specifically of my professional career, but I worked in an area that was around a lot of military people for a while. And this is when I was in fight training, when I started working in fight training. I used to be a trainer of boxers and wrestlers and stuff like that. I started doing a lot more of that after I left this Navy area. But when I was there, you'd be surprised how many people may be struggling with PTSD won't report it, won't address it. So certainly in the military, I think it's underreported. I think that in general society it may be underreported. Simply, we know that child abuse, child molestation, abuse in general in the home is underreported, particularly in certain cultures it's worse than others, but across the board it exists. So I'm not sure, it could be even higher than 8%, but I think that even 8% is a lot, 6 to 8 million people. That's a lot of people. And so it is a tough thing to live with. And if you know somebody who has PTSD, it's not an easy gig, man. It's not. And we're going to get into the symptoms, et cetera, here in a second, but he kind of touches on them, that there's a lot of behavioral issues that come up for PTSD people, and the people that love them have a difficult time handling that. I had a girlfriend before my current wife who I think really didn't understand me at all, and she was younger than me, and she didn't really understand who I was. I didn't know who I was either, so let's start with that. But I think she really struggled to try to figure out why I was so quirky and odd in these different ways and so reactionary about A, B, and C. Even my current wife, I think in the beginning was like, what is up with this guy? What is going on? But my wife's awesome. I brought her up last episode. I will give her the credit every single episode. My wife's amazing. Part of the reason why I'm a healthy human being now is that I have this support and there's somebody I can reach out to, and I was able to grow with somebody who had my back. Because my family never had my back. That's a whole nother podcast. I'll never do a big podcast on my family because I don't want to throw them under the bus. But let's just be honest about it. I come from alcoholics, a little bit of racism, a lot of stupidity, functional alcoholics at least, self-abusers, some mental illness, all throughout my family, and really bad parenting. Really bad. All right. So let's get into the next thing here. So we just talked to Brad Burge, and we're going to get into symptoms now. This is where we're going to get into where the rubber hits the road here. Let's talk about the symptoms. So there are a lot of them. There are a lot of different symptoms that pop up. I came across a lot of really cool things, but there's this group called the Anxiety and Depression Association of America had a little list of, if you have 2 or 3 or more of these, you might be concerned. The inability to remember an important aspect of a traumatic event. This could be related, and this is not related to a head injury or alcohol or getting too high or passing out. This is not being able to remember a crazy, strange, or traumatic event. Persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about yourself, others, or the world. Now, me, as a PTSD sufferer for a very long time, and I'm suffering much less now, and every day much better, both of those apply to me. In fact, I have particular memories of things that are actually, I have multiple versions of the memories. I have one memory of one event an event in which I remember it one way, but I also have a secondary memory, and I don't know which one is true. And in doing a lot of theory, a lot of study on that, I came to realize that probably the more traumatic version was true, but I don't know, and I can't prove it. But it's that confusion, that lack of knowing, which might be a red flag. And of course, negative beliefs about yourself or others, oh geez, that's me. And I think that if you have PTSD or you know anybody who does, you'll see them being very judgmental, very harsh on themselves and others. I did the same thing. I still am. I'm just getting better. PTSD is a consistent process of working to be better, just like ADD is. It's day in and day out. You just keep moving forward. Persistent, distorted blame of self or others about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events. So you're almost obsessed, or you really constantly blame yourself for this thing or another person for doing this to you. It's this constant negativist dialogue about the event. Persistent fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. I don't think I need to explain that. Markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities. That means like not wanting to be around other people. Really, at just times, you just can't be with other people. They're just too much for you. Or other people are triggers for you. Persistent inability to experience positive emotions. Somebody who that looks, obviously it sounds like depression. Depression and PTSD have a big crossover with each other. Be looking out for that. When you see depression, it's usually not standing alone. Usually it's standing with other things. Not always, but most of the time, ADD, depression, PTSD, these sort of sit in this family of behavioral functionalities or dysfunctionalities that come from the experience in your life. Now, there is clinical depression that can occur that's just biochemical, but I'm not certain there's a lot of research that just shows people are just inherently depressed. At least I think that's the minority. I'm not an expert in this, but I also battled depression and for a long time thought I was clinically depressed. I first realized I was PTSD. Then from there, after many, many years of working on that, then the realization very recently was that I also was struggling with ADHD. That was kind of obvious to everybody who knew me, except me. And you're often the last person to know if you're the person with it. So ask your partner, do you think I have these symptoms? Go through this checklist with them. They may tell you, yeah, man, that's you. Feelings of detachment or estrangement from others. So are you feeling like you really don't care or you can't connect? Almost an antisocial, get away from me kind of feeling? It can be more than that, but this is where some of it stems from, or the beginnings of that feeling. But look carefully at how you're feeling and how you're reacting. Reacting is a big key to looking for the symptoms of PTSD. Irritability or aggressive behavior. Of course, this comes from a lot of different things, but in conjunction with other stuff, this is a key element. Like I get really frustrated really quick, and I have to work on it every day. Reckless or self-destructive behavior. This is funny because a lot of these tie in with ADHD too, but again, this is about PTSD, and that's a separate issue. But reckless or self-destructive behavior, it's almost an impulsiveness or a willingness to take yourself to the very edge and do really reckless and dangerous things. Hypervigilance, that's a big one. You'll see in almost all, not all, but most PTSD sufferers, hypervigilance about something. And this also relates to memory of events, if they had an event. In my case, I had a series of what you'd call deeply traumatic events. One of them was that I was beaten repeatedly with a wooden spoon, and a lot. And in fact, I just say wooden spoon, and I get this numb feeling right here on my hands. I don't know why on my hands, because I've never hit on, well, I don't remember if I was hit on my hands, but I can't look at a wooden spoon. I can't even see it in a movie. My wife has a drawer of wooden spoons. I don't even want to be in the kitchen when they're being used. She knows not to use them when I'm around. In fact, my hands are going numb. So it might change the subject. But yeah, so there is this issue of hypervigilance, being afraid, being nervous, always being afraid. Like my daughter, she walks around with a cup on a saucer on a cup, and I'm like, hey, or a cup on a saucer, sorry, and I'm like, hey, you got to stop that. You're going to drop that, and I kind of freak out. I'm always really nervous about danger or somebody getting hurt. I see a kid riding a bike down the street without a helmet. I'm like, oh my God, watch out for that. I'm really reactive to that kind of stuff. You'll see that people with PTSD are really like that. They're hyper vigilant about time or structure or order or what needs to occur. Problems with concentration can occur in some PTSD folks. And of course, sleep. Always in these issues with all of these types of conditions, sleep is going to be a big red flag too. Okay. So that's our checklist. Now, I also want to mention a few websites quickly because these are going to be, if you're on YouTube, you can see these links at the bottom. I want to mention them on the air because I think if you want to check some things out, I think it's worth doing. PTSDassociation.com has an assessment. So that's ptsdassociation.com/assessment, ASSESSMENT. That's a pretty good assessment. I reviewed it myself. There's an actual test. There's a PDF link on there that will take you to a PDF, and I think it's 17 questions, which I'm going to go over really quickly here. But there's a bunch of other really good sites. ADAA.org, which I mentioned them already. That's the anxiety organization. AlbertaCounseling.ca has a really good assessment. AlbertaCounseling.ca/assess, ASSESS-PTSD.html. Also, there's a couple other ones, but they'll be on the YouTube. They'll be on the YouTube channel. There's also for treatments, there is a good list of treatments on the ADAA.org site, as well as the AP site called APA.org. Strongly recommend checking those sites out if you want more information. But let's get into this. I came across this checklist. Now, if you're listening and you're wondering if you or somebody else has it, listen to these questions. I'm not going to spend much time on them. I'm just going to ask the question, hesitate a second or two for you to think about it, and move on. But the standards are, is it not at all, a little bit, moderately, quite a bit, or extremely? Number 1, do you have repeated disturbing memories, thoughts, or images of a stressful experience? Do you have repeated disturbing dreams of a stressful experience? Suddenly acting or feeling as if a stressful experience were happening again, as if you were reliving it? Feeling very upset when something reminded you of a stressful experience? Having physical reactions, heart pounding, trouble breathing, sweating, when something reminded you of a stressful experience? Avoiding thinking about or talking about a stressful experience, or avoiding having feelings related to it, shutting them off? Avoiding activities or situations because they reminded you of a stressful experience? Like, I don't want to see wooden spoons. If I were in there, I'll leave the room immediately, among other things. Trouble remembering important parts of a stressful experience. We talked about that a minute ago. Loss of interest in activities that you used to enjoy. Feeling distant or cut off from other people. Feeling emotionally numb or being unable to have loving feelings for those close to you. Feeling as if your future will somehow be cut short. This is that hypervigilance, danger feeling. Trouble falling or staying asleep. Feeling irritable or having angry outbursts. Having difficulty concentrating. Being super alert or watchful or on guard. Like, I have a baseball bat near my desk. I have a machete in my bedroom hidden. I have a field hockey stick in my office, which is near the front door. Is that silly? Oh, of course it is. Is anybody going to break into my house? No, I'm in Canada. It's not going to happen. But am I worried about it? Yeah, I am. Yeah, silly. I'm better. But when my wife leaves and I'm in the house by myself, I alarm the house, lock everything up, and I'm a 220-pound, 53-year-old fit male who's been trained in how to handle his own, himself, and yet I'm nervous about sleeping alone. So, and lastly, feeling jumpy or easily startled. So this is one of the assessments that you would check off and check out. I would strongly recommend people check it out if you think you have it. Okay, keep listening because there's a lot to go into. So what does this mean if you have PTSD? What does this mean for your life anyway? So I'm going to play a piece from Janet Sehorn. This is her talking about her husband. He's a Vietnam veteran. And I think this is an interesting story. And I can really relate to this guy. Like, really, I mean, my wife, she hasn't heard this clip yet. She hears it, she's going to roll her eyes and be like, yeah, that's exactly you. Check this out.
So in that brain change, the sensory system, when it's overloaded, looks like this. You become hypervigilant and hyper-aroused. So we like to go on ski trips. We started our kids when they were toddlers. And we had to be out of the house at 6 in the morning. Now, for any of you who have had toddlers and you're trying to get them awake, fed, and dressed by 6 in the morning, you better have a miracle on hand. At 1 minute after 6, my husband's pacing. At 2 minutes after 6, he's getting a little anxious. At 3 minutes after 6, now he's irritable. And at 4 minutes after 6, he's found language. And it sounds like this. Hurry up. You're going too slow. What's the matter with you? We planned on this last night. We were going to be in the car driving down the road at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, we eventually get there. Although I didn't want to be in that car with him, and nor did my sons. And going down the road, whoa! All of a sudden, he's singing. He's happy. We're a mess. But now he's in control. No worries. We made it past the danger. Now, this is what we didn't understand. We didn't understand that in combat, if you're late, people died.
So, I mean, I wasn't in combat, but I had a series of events that were, I would say, life-threatening. And that hypervigilance that he's sort of showing and exhibiting in that clip as a veteran is something you'll see in people that aren't even veterans but have seen, you know, if you've been a victim of rape, you're not going to want to be alone or walk down a street or go to a party alone, or, you know, there's things you'll avoid. If you've been assaulted or beaten up or, you know, really got pummeled, put in the hospital, had a car accident, you know, I know some people that are completely afraid to be in cars now. This is all kind of related, this is related to trauma and the effects of trauma. Now I'm going to get into, I'm going to just jump into the next clip because I think this guy has an interesting overview that I really want to share with you. His name is Dr. Peter Turk. He's the section chief of the PTSD clinic team at the VA hospital in Charleston, South Carolina. And he's also a professor of psychiatry at Medical University of South Carolina. And he talks about a theory that I don't think it's really, I mean, you could say it's a theory, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So I wouldn't call it a theory. I would say it makes sense. It's logical about the people's need to process and why PTSD sort of can even happen because of this need. Take a look at, listen to this for a sec.
While a leading theory developed at the University of Pennsylvania suggests we get these symptoms because our bodies, indeed our human condition, has an experience and a gravity to process emotional information. And when we can't, our body doesn't know what to do with the information, so it keeps it on loop. Right? So what do I mean by gravity to process? Well, let's consider the evolution of the shark. We're told that this is nature's perfect swimming and eating machine. In fact, it's such a perfect machine at doing these things that if you try to stop a shark from swimming, there'll be dire health consequences for the shark. Well, much like the shark who needs to swim to be healthy, we need to process emotional information. It's what we do. Nature's adapted us to be keen organizers of incoming information, with one-time trial learning, amazing abilities at pattern recognition, and the ability to create schemas or internal file folders that guide our behaviors and organize new situations. Right? All of these amazingly evolved capacities are all focused on giving us an ability to instantaneously stamp and recall emotional content related to incoming information. We need to do this first because we have to know whether or not to be afraid of something. It's the evolutionary pressure to keep us safe so we can reproduce. Now, safety depends on predictability, and predictability depends on conquering chaos wherever it's encountered. And our brains are physically arranged to facilitate this immediately. As a result, humans aren't very capable of experiencing chaos. We use the word loosely to describe disorganized situations, but true chaos is beyond description to us. It's almost as if we've been evolved not to touch it.
So I think you could almost call this the PTSD chaos theory or something, because it is, I think it's very interesting. And as a sufferer of PTSD, I can kind of understand and relate to what he's talking about, that you can't make sense of this event. I'm going to get into my own personal story in a little bit. And when I do, I'm going to come back to this because, and there's, just the events that occur to you in a traumatic scenario, or even abuse, neglect, rape, child molestation, death, a car accident, plane accident, whatever it is, or even just straight up, pain and suffering day to day in a really traumatic or messed up environment. It's hard to make sense, especially as a child, but even as an adult, but particularly as a child. Why is this happening? Why am I feeling this pain? Why is this person doing this to me? Et cetera, and so on. So trying to make order out of that quote unquote disorder is a key component, I think, into where PTSD's origins lie. Now, if you're the child, let's talk about the genetic side of that as well. If you're the child of a person with PTSD even, there's a lot of research to show that it's possible that you may behaviorally be picking up the patterns of your parents. For example, a hypervigilant parent has a child. Now, there's kind of two sides of this argument. Is the child picking up a behavioral aspect of paranoia or hypervigilance? Or is it that there's a genetic component to the propensity to PTSD? I think I read recently, I don't have the data in front of me, but I believe it was like 1/3 of all people with PTSD have children who exhibit early signs of the sensitivity towards trauma if it occurs in their life in any way. So that propensity to sensitivity may be a genetic dynamic. But I think the thing to remember, though, is this. All of these symptoms you may have pieces of these symptoms and they may mess with you in your day-to-day. But if it's not impacting your life in a negative way, if you're not having real trouble functioning in different things, then you may or may not have PTSD, in terms of an actual diagnosis. You may have what's called, I think it's called minor PTSD. I think that's the term that they use. And it means that you can have kind of semblance of PTSD, still have that sensitivity, but you're not full-blown PTSD. You're not having all of these symptoms at full speed, but you may still be unhappy. You may be battling depression or self-loathing or reckless behavior, but not to the point where your life is massively disrupted. So you as a person who, if you're doing an evaluation for yourself, look carefully at how you're acting, how you're feeling, and really the results of your actions. Ask somebody who knows you. Do I seem reckless to you? Do I seem depressed to you? Do I seem detached? Do I seem hypervigilant? Do I seem grumpy or overly sensitive? You may not like what they say to you, but listen to them, because chances are they have some very good feedback for you. My wife was phenomenal at being honest with me, and is one of the reasons why I was able to get help and get much better. I mean, of course, I could see in all my issues merging. Mine were just flowing out of me like lava. But it really does help to have a sane, friendly, warm, safe person there by your side, or a therapist, or whatever, or a community center person, or whatever it is, to just give you some feedback, to help you get that biofeedback loop and understand who you are and what you're being. We're going to get into lifestyle changes in a little bit about how you can deal with all this stuff. But we're looking at the quality of your life. How is the quality of your life? Are you living the life you want? Are you feeling the way you want to feel? If not, take a look. And let's go back and, reverse engineer our lives and get back to the origin and find out what's indeed happening. I think most people are in denial about most of what's happened to them. And a lot of people will say, well, I didn't have trauma. I didn't have trauma. I don't know. Let's look at how you're, and then there's also people that have had trauma who have absolutely none of these symptoms. They're just very resilient people. Like the guy at the end of the podcast, which I got to share this guy with you. All right, but let's get into treatment options first. First, let's just say this. If you don't get treatment, your body's going to wear out. One of the things that hypervigilance does, it's a lot like ADD does. You're just always in high gear, or you're often in high gear. Fear, hypervigilance, worry, dread, all these things drain you. You walk around being pissed off at yourself, pissed at everybody else, frustrated, nothing's on time, everything's scary, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be all those things. I may be exaggerating. But each one of those are draining to the body. And there's a lot of research to show that that kind of thinking chronically can exacerbate diabetes, can lead to heart attacks, high blood pressure, chronic fatigue syndrome, other psychological conditions can be exacerbated, depression we've already discussed. If you have ADHD already, or you have a propensity to it, PTSD can trigger it. Also, having ADHD and having a trauma can perhaps trigger it in the other direction. So if it's you, please get help, please. If it's not you and it's somebody else you know, keep listening, because we're going to go into some of the therapies and stuff that really does work. Now, first I'm going to talk about CBT, and I've got a list of treatments here. I'm just going to talk about them really quickly. There's a website, where did I get this from? APA.org, I mentioned them earlier. Now, this is a really, this is a pretty comprehensive list. I'm going to go over them really fast, and then I'm going to go back up and talk about them. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on the relationships between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, targets current problems and symptoms, and focuses on changing patterns and behaviors. So this is about changing patterns, thinking patterns, doing patterns. Cognitive processing therapy, CPT, is a specific type of cognitive behavioral therapy that helps patients learn how to modify and challenge unhelpful beliefs. So if you think, I'm a bad person, or I'm a terrible person, or something terrible has happened, and you've attached these beliefs about yourself or self-hate towards the trauma, this is where CPT would come in. Cognitive therapy is derived from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it basically entails modifying the pessimistic evaluations and memories of trauma. So these kind of all work together for most therapists. The CBT, CPT, and cognitive therapy, they're kind of all one thing. Most people that do therapy in this area are sort of working in all areas as one. They break it down a little bit here, but the practical truth is that when you are doing therapy in this area, you're going to be touching on all three sort of at the same time. There's also something called prolonged exposure. It's a specific type of cognitive behavioral therapy that teaches individuals to gradually approach trauma-related memories, feelings, and situations. Now, I'm not really, I don't really know how this differs. I'm not that familiar with this particular one. But I think the idea is that if you just can't deal with the trauma, then that prolonged exposure is sort of getting you there to where you can. Because if you can't, darkness hates light. So if you put light onto darkness, darkness is gone. But if you don't want to see what's going on, you're going to want to keep it in the dark. So fear of even talking about it means no progress, no moving forward. So I think prolonged exposure deals with that. It's kind of a technical term for it. But really, we're just talking about trying to get us to the place where we can even talk about it. Now, this group conditionally recommends these, but I'm going to beg to differ here. I don't know about eclectic psychotherapy. I know what psychotherapy is. I don't really quite understand what they mean by brief electric psychotherapy. But essentially, psychotherapy is dealing with changing of emotions of shame and self-hate and guilt. Addressing that this is not your issue. You are not when you were raped. You're not the cause of the rape. That car accident, that wasn't your fault. A lot of people who deal with trauma issues do a lot of self-hate and a lot of self-loathing. They blame themselves. Survivor's guilt, it's called, shows up. This is a form of PTSD expression. There's also one they bring up too, which I personally did and I strongly recommend. They only conditionally recommend it. It's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR therapy. Now, I've done this personally, and I think that combined with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy, I did that plus EMDR sort of as a combined, and I think that really got me through. I mean, EMDR was critical because I couldn't process the memories. I couldn't even remember some of them. They were partial memories. They were mixed up memories. And it's not really important because, one thing that you'll learn about when you study this or you start doing the therapy, you're not really remembering the trauma event anyway. What you're actually remembering is the memory of it. So, that's true in research about memory, is that you don't really remember a thing. 6 years ago when I did this thing or went to some place, I don't remember that place and that thing. What I'm remembering is that I remembered it. There's a memory from it, and I remember that memory. And every time I'm remembering a memory, I'm remembering memories. This is why It's almost like the telephone game where a message down the line changes. That's why people's memories do alter over time. You can alter them yourselves, or they just alter by just misremembering a memory once, and then all of a sudden that memory's shifted, good or bad. I believe that some of the traumatic events that I went through, I've changed the memories for whatever reason, and I'm not sure what the truth is. And does it matter? What matters more is how I'm absorbing it. Again, going back to the very beginning, it's not what happened to you, it's that did it. It's what happened inside as a result of what happened to you. So it's a very subjective dynamic. So these are some of the therapies, but let's just start really with, or let's jump to lifestyle versions, which is meditate, work out, do yoga, do some form of exercise, walk in nature. I talked this in the last podcast. I talked a lot about this, and I strongly recommend that if you're going to do these therapies, which I think they're great, and you should do them if you can get access to them. But if you don't have access to them, or even if you do, you got to make a lifestyle change. Alcoholics don't go to bars for a reason, or if they do, they are careful. Drug addicts don't hang out with their junkie friends or their pot smoking friends or whatever. Victims of trauma don't go to the places where they were raped or beaten, for a reason. There's a reason we don't go back to the places where there's nothing to be helped. If let's say I was, a victim of child rape at a particular location, a house somewhere. I'm not going to gain anything from going back to that house and trying to work through it there. There's zero to be gained. In fact, only more reinstituting of trauma can occur. So there's no point in that. What the point is, though, is processing the memories and moving through the memories of it and the thought patterns of the guilt and the various negative self-hating, hating others, all of that stuff's got to be processed for us to get somewhere. Now, also, there's this other therapy. All right, I've been teasing this the whole podcast. For those of you who've ever taken drugs, I've done it, quite a few of them. In fact, pretty much all of them I can think of, really, almost all of them. I'm not proud of that, by the way. That's nothing to be bragging about. That's my reckless behavior, my PTSD, and my ADD at work. But let's just bring this up. Ecstasy, MDMA, which they're not the same, okay? But there's this amazing new therapy that has been tested, and man, it is showing promise. So I'm going to play Brad Berg again. This is the gentleman from just before in the podcast. I want you to take a second to listen to what he has to say here. This was eye-opening for me. I got to be honest. I didn't know anything about this. Check it out.
Now, despite some fairly sensational headlines you may have seen, and despite what your drug dealer will tell you, MDMA is not ecstasy. What is sold as ecstasy or now Molly on the street illegally usually contains other drugs, rarely contains MDMA, and often in dosages that are dangerous or unknown. So these two are just simply not the same drug. Pure MDMA, when combined with psychotherapy, has actually been shown in some early clinical trials to be very effective for reducing PTSD symptoms and keeping them away. In this treatment, MDMA is not used as a treatment in and of itself. It's used to enhance the effectiveness of psychotherapy for PTSD. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is a treatment that happens in a clinic under therapeutic review with trained and licensed therapists, and is very much not a take two and call me in the morning kind of situation. So for example, nobody would ever get a prescription for MDMA to then go fill at a local pharmacy. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is given in 3 psychotherapy sessions with MDMA over a 10-week course of psychotherapy. So people only take the drug 3 times. In these early clinical trials, 100 participants were treated with either MDMA-assisted psychotherapy or placebo plus psychotherapy. In those trials with placebo, 23% no longer qualified for PTSD after 3 treatments. Now, those are actually pretty good results by clinical trial standards, but when we added MDMA, that 23% went up to 61%. 61% after just 3 sessions no longer had PTSD. Now, they didn't just see their symptoms reduced. These people didn't qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD anymore. Now, with no further treatments, 1 year later, that number went up to 68%. They didn't take the drug again, but kept getting better. Something inside of these people had changed.
Okay, so, wow. MDMA treatment. I'd read a headline of this one somewhere, Twitter or something, and I just thought I didn't know what to think of it. And in doing the research of this came up, and I was like, I really need to investigate this. I didn't take it seriously. I'll be honest. I saw the headlines on YouTube, and I started watching some videos, and then this guy's piece came up, and my mouth dropped. Wow. I'm already through a lot of my work, so I wouldn't go back and, revisit this to do this thing. But I would say, wow, because I think maybe it accelerates that sense of love and self-love you can feel. I've done ecstasy. I did it a long time ago, I'll admit. But I remember I felt nothing but love and warmth, really, I just wanted to cuddle for hours. And so, I can understand why this would have, a possible effect. So anyway, I want to bring that up, MDMA treatment. If those of you are struggling with this, look into it. I don't know if it's legal in Canada. I don't really know the legality of it at this point. I mean, obviously, these guys aren't in jail for doing it, so clearly it's not as big a deal. But I've also heard something about psychedelics too being used. Don't know much about that. I did a lot of acid, That was very bad, very difficult for me because I had all these issues. So I took LSD and had a whole lot of bad trips. But I don't know if that necessarily helped me much. Might have even aggravated my condition. I was even more sensitive, I think, after LSD. But there may be something to that too. Mushrooms or something. I've heard something about that. I don't know much about it. Apologize. I'm not an encyclopedia. I'm a human being. But I have heard something positive about that. But the MDMA thing, that's got some real statistics behind it. So there are a number of videos on YouTube about that. So you check those out, Google it. If you're looking for MDMA treatment in your area, you could probably Google your city. I'm certain somebody may be able to do it. I don't know. There may be some areas where they just can't get away with it, more conservative areas. We're in Canada where I think maybe we can get away with it. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm from Seattle. I wouldn't be surprised Seattle's got it. Seattle's pretty cool, hip city. So look into it. Okay, but now we're going to get to the sort of the next segment here. We're coming up on our full hour, and I really got a really good audio piece I want to play, but I first want to talk a little bit about these people because they're in their case studies. This is very interesting. These are 10 people that are very famous who came out and admitted they have PTSD and talked about why. And I think, why is this important that we talk about famous people? Well, you can relate to them, to some degree. They're people you know. But I think the reason why it's important to talk about other people getting through it or working through it or having it, it puts a face to the whole issue of PTSD. It puts something real, tangible, particularly for people who don't know anything about it. Maybe for example, you have a father who's a little detached himself. Maybe he's a war vet, or maybe he's just kind of a gruff personality, doesn't have a lot of sensitivity. His son is complaining he has PTSD, and this guy's like, you don't have PTSD, toughen up, or whatever. But then he reads that, somebody like Mick Jagger had it, Mick Jagger, well, he's a Mick Jagger fan maybe. And he's like, Mick Jagger, or whatever. So let's get into this list because I don't know, you might be surprised. Ariana Grande. Singer-songwriter Ariana Grande has opened up about her struggles with PTSD. There was a suicide bomber at her concert in UK, killed 22 people. This was in 2017. She's talked openly about that, and she's had a scan on her brain done, and she even shared the scan of her brain with her fans. I love that she did that. That is freaking awesome because, to come out and be open about it, some people say, well, get over it. Why are you trying to get some sympathy? Oh, come on, man. Let's get over that stuff. We're past that, aren't we? We're talking about trying to connect people to what's going on. And if somebody who's famous can say, hey, look, I have this issue, it helps other people come forward. Say, I have that too. Geez, it's not so much a stigma. I cannot feel like I'm such an anomaly. Some famous person I know has this. Whoopi Goldberg has it. Now, hers is interesting. She witnessed a plane crash mid-flight. Apparently, two planes crashed. She witnessed this. Wow, bummer, by the way. And she has said that it really affected her. She also grew up in a deprived housing project and had learning disabilities. And I think she associates this sort of combination to her having PTSD. Interesting. Mick Jagger is celebrated around the world for being the front man of Rolling Stones. But apparently he has PTSD. He developed it after his partner, his long-term partner, Loren Scott, committed suicide. That's again, it shows that PTSD can be something that's not even you experienced. You just had deep emotional trauma about a thing for a long time, and it weighed so heavily on you that it created a traumatic event in you. And if you're already somewhat disposed to the sensitivities that come around PTSD, then it makes perfect sense that you could develop PTSD from an event like that. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, this was John President Kennedy's wife. I mean, her husband was shot in the head right next to her when she was, on live television. So I don't really need to go into what that's all about. My house is terrible, and quite openly discussed it later in her life. Not for a long time, but eventually did come out and admitted it. Tennis star, my daughter's a big tennis girl, and Monica Seles has a really good book out about her life. I strongly recommend people check it out if you're a tennis fan. But she was stabbed with a 9-inch knife at the age of 19 on tennis court. This isn't so insane. This guy was obsessed with Steffi Graf, another tennis player, and he didn't want Monica Seles to win, so he jumped out of the crowd and stabbed her right here, like in the clavicle, or I forget where it was, somewhere like in the upper neck, shoulder area here, the deltoid, something, and stabbed her, and it ruined her career. I mean, she was able to come back, but it was a big deal. And you know what's really messed up, by the way, on a side, talking about punishment in Germany. This was Germany, I think, when this happened. And Germany, this is so messed up. This guy committed this violent act. And I think she said that he got 6 months probation and was out on the street within a year. What the heck? I know it's mental illness, but he stabbed a woman, could have killed her. I can't even believe that. Anyway, come on, Germany. If you're in Germany, you should be going, dude, talk to your politicians. If somebody commits a crime like that, they should go to jail for a little while. But I got a separate podcast coming up about how we deal with the criminal justice system and how we deal with people that really should be in jail. But anyway, so she really had a lot of issues with weight, a lot of fear issues, a lot of dread, and a tremendous amount she was very hypervigilant for the rest of her life. She wrote a book, again, I mentioned it, called Getting a Grip on My Body, My Mind, Myself. I read the book. It's a really good book. Shia LaBeouf, a little quirky actor that has been in the news off and on for doing some crazy things. But he is, he's admitted that for having, he has PTSD. His parents were separated when he was a child, and he witnessed his mother getting raped. Holy fuck. Excuse my language. I don't try to swear on the podcast, so I apologize for that swear word. I try not to swear on podcasts. He hid them, though, and he was he had a bit of a quirky behavior. He was publicly drunk a lot. He had a lot of disorderly conduct stuff. And he admitted that he lived in fear of someone coming after him or his mother for the rest of pretty much most of his life. And it was when he was in rehab that he came to terms with PTSD. And he actually made a phenomenally good, I think it's an Amazon or Netflix movie. I think it's Amazon. Can't remember. But it's renowned for being a phenomenal piece of work about his father. I thought that was very interesting, his relationship with his father. Barbra Streisand. She has also come out that she had serious anxiety issues, performance anxiety issues. And to the point where she had an anxiety disorder, and and I'll read this. Streisand is a notoriously reclusive person and doesn't like to leave the perfection of her own home where she can control what is happening. So apparently extremely hypervigilant. And I think that, according to this has something to do with the death of her father and not getting love from her mother or her stepfather. And so, again, it illustrates, that's part of my trauma, although I have a lot of other stuff, abuse, neglect, refusal to, not getting love from people that really should be loving you. Alanis Morissette, self-confessed attention junkie, admits to having suffered panic attacks and depression. And she said, quote, "It's taken a lot of work and therapy to just not be suicidal." I don't really think it has a note in here as to what caused it. but she claims that she's fought through love addiction, sex addiction, and addiction in general as well. So I can relate to some of that as well. I won't go into that detail. Lady Gaga has also come out as suffering from PTSD. She now has admitted or stated that she was raped by an older man when she was 19. Wow, that's terrible. And that she's gotten therapy for PTSD. She's also donated money or been a patron of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation. This is a foundation for, I believe, anxiety and related issues. So good for her, and good for every one of these to come out, because that's part of the process of everybody figuring out this is a thing. Charlize Theron, I'll end on this one. When she was 15 years old, her father threatened to kill her mother, and so she shot him, killing him in self-defense. Wow. I was attacked by my stepmother at a certain age, and attacked her when she attacked me. She also claims that she used ecstasy, mushrooms, acid, cocaine. Boy, I did all that stuff. And she was also a wake and baker. Boy, that was me for years and years and years. Now at 43, although I don't know when this was printed, so this might not be 43 anymore, she has done therapy and she has a great life. But she has worked through it. So these are some famous people who have gotten through that. And so I'm going to, now let's see here. I want to, before I get into my quick story, and I'm going to end on my story, but I want to talk about this guy, Charles Hunt. Charles Hunt is a phenomenal guy. I didn't know who he was before I did the research on this, but he is an interesting guy. And I want to play his piece. I'm going to play 2 quotes from him, and then we're going to wrap this up. We're at 1 hour and 7 minutes, so we've gone a little long. But this is an important topic, so we gotta tackle the whole thing. But here's Charles Hunt talking. Take a listen to this.
It's during a 3-year period between age 7 and 10 years old that some of the most traumatic yet vivid moments of my childhood would play out as my mother's disease of addiction took root. When I close my eyes, I see them all just as clearly today as they happened decades ago. Like the time I discovered my mother's boyfriend, eyes wide open, laying on the floor of a drug overdose. A discovery that initially paralyzed me in fear, much in the same way that his body laid motionless at my feet as he blankly stared at the ceiling. Like the day my mother sat me down on my bed to read me a handwritten letter that my dad had written and sent me in the mail. It would be the first time I'd ever heard the 5-syllable word incarcerated and learned what it meant. Like the day my grandmother, who took over raising me when we were evicted out of the projects due to my mother's addiction, received a call to inform me that my father, after being jumped in a prison fight, was brain dead. He would die later that night before I ever saw him again alive. Like the times I would later visit my own mother in jail. A hazy plexiglass window separating us physically and emotionally, while also serving to remind me of the fate that my father met in those very walls. I felt the pain, the sadness, the shame, the solitude, the adjectives that as a preteen meet the clinical definitions of depression. Yet when I opened my eyes, the worst of life couldn't take out the best of me, because I'm still standing here in front of you.
So I've got another piece of him. I'm going to end on that one with another comment by him. But that is something else. I come from a white middle class, we were more white lower middle class. My dad was the first guy to ever graduate from college in my family, but I had a profoundly alcoholic family, and there was a lot of physical abuse, neglect, etc. My mother left when I was a young kid. My grandmother almost killed me in a car. She was so drunk that she couldn't drive and tried to, and drove us into a house at high speed without seatbelts on. My mother abandoned me and was a drug dealer. I would visit her and see death and experience beatings and just insanity. I watched a man almost burned to death when I was about 6 or 7. I watched my mother get beat up and hit by a car by her own boyfriend because she refused to cooperate with him in some way. He was a cocaine and LSD shooting drug dealer who would kill you on a heartbeat. She told me that over and over again. I was spanked to the point where I can barely touch. I cannot even deal with a wooden spoon. Like I said, the man who burned himself almost killed himself in front of me. In fact, I think he may have died later. I don't really know. I watched my mother fight with a group of other women over cocaine in a house that I was visiting. I was always having to call my dad, "Get me out of here!" I don't know what my dad was doing, sending me there in the first place. And then as an adult, I was leading some men to a sandwich shop in Washington, D.C. when I was working there. And as we approached this intersection, I thought I lost my government badge, so I was looking for it, and I turned around maybe to go get it. And as I came back around and looked, I watched these 2 men get struck by a vehicle and cut into a million pieces. Well, not a million, but what seemed like a million, body parts everywhere. And I can, to this day, still remember the left arm of one of the guys cut off at the elbow with the wedding ring on his finger. I was in shock, and I don't remember every moment of that. There's some blurry parts, but I remember looking down at this arm and the blood and the liquid and the plasma or whatever's coming out of the forearm as it's laying right there, like 2 feet in front of me. I was frozen. And I remember thinking to myself, this man has a wife, maybe a child, and they don't know he's dead, and I do. So those are some of my experiences. But this guy's experiences were pretty brutal. And you can have an experience of just poverty and racism and oppression that's economic and political, or you can have straight up death and destruction and everything in between. And all of that can lead to PTSD. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I'm going to end on Charles Hunt's quote here. This is awesome. Please listen to this. If you hear nothing else, remember nothing else. This is about resiliency. I'm all about what this guy says right here.
So what does trauma teach us about resilience? Sometimes we need to tell ourselves what to think when our mind starts telling us things that we don't need to hear. That you can and will overcome and succeed. And not just in spite of, but precisely because of. That with the proper perspective and a positive attitude, we have power. That life is easier when you're prepared. And just because you can't plan for everything, doesn't mean you can't be ready for something. That perspective sometimes requires partnership and perseverance. And understand, sometimes it gets hard, and it's tough, and it's painful. You get tired, you get weak, and when you don't know how to keep going, sometimes all the strength you need is the strength to ask others for help. That it's okay to acknowledge that I was a victim, but refuse to own being a victim. You get that subtle distinction, that difference between past and present tense, that gives us power. Power to change the way we think, power to change our circumstances, and ultimately power to overcome.
Well, I wanted to end on that note, and I'm just going to wrap up a few things because we were already at an hour and some odd minutes. I don't even know, an hour and 15 it looks like, or something like that. So I'm going to quickly do some takeaways from this. But Mr. Charles Hunt, man, kudos to you, man. Good kudos to you. You've been through a lot, and I love your message. I love your message of resiliency. This is exactly the kind of thinking I tell myself as I went through my therapy, and I still tell myself, I am successful not in spite of, but because of my experiences. I am tougher because of what I've been through. I'm wiser, tougher, stronger, smarter. Yes, I'm quirky and weird, and yeah, not everybody understands me. I talk way too much, blah, blah, blah. That's why I have a darn podcast. I need somewhere to talk. But I'll tell you, I am tough, and I am aware, and I am clued in, and I'm connected. And it took a lot of work to get there, but I'm there. And I believe in today and tomorrow. I don't think about, look, the past is the past, and I'm not asking you to just forget about it. You need your therapy. You need your work. Do your work. But there is a tomorrow. And Earth, we can do this. So here are my 5 takeaways. We live in a world where trauma, pain, and loss is happening to many of the people and communities all around the world. So we need to strive and evolve to move forward as a community all the time. Pay attention to others, show compassion, connect to them, listen to them, be loving and patient, be connected, be human. PTSD is not about just soldiers and sexual abuse and death. It's a lot more complex than that. And there's much more of a gray area around what trauma and suffering are. Be aware of that. Be connected to it. When someone tells you they're struggling, listen to them. Listen to yourself. Really, it's about us, your own self too. Most of us are covering that up. A lot of us use other people's pain to focus on instead of our own. Let's pay attention to ourselves. I'm not asking you to sit there and dwell on your pain. I'm asking you to realize it's there and then try to constructively evolve through it. Because you can get better. I did. He did. There's so many people who have. Millions have. You cannot erase the past. You cannot erase the past. But you can develop the future. This moment, from this exact second to the next second in front of you, it's yours to control. It's yours to modify. And what you think up here in this little brain of yours is going to affect how you feel and how you live. So listen to your thoughts. They matter. Your thoughts matter. Telling yourself, I suck and I do this and I blah, 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 that's going to affect. But if you say, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself, do that. Say to yourself, I love myself at least 10, 20, 30 times a day. Just do it. Your subconscious doesn't know what true is true or not. It only knows what you tell it. The darkness hates the light, and therefore be the light and expose it on the darkness. Look, man, I'm no perfect. I'm so far from being perfect, my God. But when I go back to 15 to 25 to 35 to 45 and how I've evolved, I'm very proud of myself. I've come from a very dark place, dark places. And I stand here today, or I sit here today in front of you, telling you it is 100% possible. Trust me on that. In your own treatment or in helping others, hearing the stories and the success and failures of others helps. To listen about how other people did it or not helps you. It helps you. It empowers you. You may not realize it, but just knowing someone else did it. We grow collectively when we listen collectively. And finally, humans are resilient. Ultimately, you are still alive. You are still breathing, and while you are standing there or sitting or working or whatever you're doing right now, you can improve your life. So never, ever, ever give up. Write it on your hand. Never give up. It could be the most important thing you ever do is to reach out to another person, whether they're struggling or you are or they both are. Go to a group that's doing it. If you know somebody, so I have a sister who's dealing with some stuff. I'm not reaching out to her very well. You know what I'm going to do right after this PTSD? I'm going to call her. I've been feeling really bad about it because I haven't been reaching out. You can always get better. I'm sitting here preaching this to you, and yet I got things I got to do. So as soon as this podcast is over, I'm going to give her a ring. Although it's on the East Coast, it's pretty late. So maybe I'll call her tomorrow. But I will do it because I have a duty to other people around me to reach out to them like I wanted somebody to reach out to me. So thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I've gone way over my time than I normally would, but this is super important. This is just too important to go short on. Thank you very much for listening to Earth We Can Do This. I want everybody to be safe in these virus times, to wear your mask, to get your vaccine, please. Have a great day, week, month, year, and take control of your life and have an awesome life. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be talking to you next week. Thanks a lot, and goodbye, everybody.
Earth We Can Do This has been brought to you by contactsforless.ca, the only online contact lens seller in Canada to give away half of its net profits to help save the planet. So thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting contactsforless.ca.